I've been on mute. That's a rookie mistake. It is my great introduction. Thank you, Rabbi Hauer, for those introductory words. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our panelists for tonight to talk about how to make your Shabbos table come alive for your family, for your guests, for your children, for your community. Our three distinguished panelists are Mrs. Elisheva Kaminetsky, who's the Judaic Studies principal at Stella K. Abraham High School for Girls and the Dean of Education for Girls Summer Programs at NCSY. Mrs. Kaminetsky, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is my dear friend, Rabbi Judah Mischel, who's the Executive Director of Camp HASC for Special Needs Children and the Mashpia of NCSY. Welcome, Rabbi Judah Mischel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And finally, great esteem to introduce Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, my cousin and the senior rabbi of the Boca Raton Synagogue, Rabbi Efrem Goldberg.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you, cousin, and everybody else.
What an absolute joy to have everyone. I don't want to get accused of nepotism, so we're going to go back to the top of the key for our first question. I'm going to try to be a somewhat vigilant moderator, given the amount of time that we have and the amount of questions that I hope to cover. So if I do jump in, it's obviously not personal, but we'll begin with Mrs. Kaminetsky, and then we'll have the other panelists jump in. Mrs. Kaminetsky, how is the Shabbos table you grew up with different than the Shabbos table that you currently have in your home?
Okay, that's a good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is actually the configuration of the Shabbos table. I guess I'll start off by saying that much is similar. I, Baruch Hashem, grew up in a home where Shabbos was central to our week, and certainly a launching pad for family time, for connection to each other, and for connecting to Torah. I grew up at a time where we were far less distracted than we are now, but it was still the Shabbos table that kind of brought the whole family together at one time, and was a time where we had family discussions. We generally did have dinner together very frequently, but the Shabbos was that central, location, and that central kind of like a grounding, I would say, for us as a family, and where a lot of values were transmitted. When I think about the things that are different, the first thing that actually comes to mind seems kind of silly and insignificant, but has definitely made an impact on our Shabbos table, and that is the way we are seated at our table. For a number of years, I would say until my oldest child was probably about 10 years old, we had some pretty traditional seating. Some families have the mother at one head, the father at the other. Sometimes the parents sit catty corner on the corner of a table, and the children sit around. We were actually inspired by seeing this in my brother's home. But at our Shabbos table, my husband sits opposite me in the center of the table. So the head of the table is here, and we're here and here. And we have found that to be something which really helps to take the title of tonight's panel, Engagement at the Shabbos Table. Nobody kind of gets lost down at the under end of the table, nor are there two separate conversations happening simultaneously at all times at the table, this end and that end. But whether it means that our guests perhaps are sitting to our one side of us and our family is to the other side, but we can kind of pivot and kind of allow for the conversation to happen between the two sides of the table, or even just simply that there are 4 seats that are next to a parent if you have a Shabbos table with young children, and there's kind of like an anchoring in the center of the table so that everybody can get some modicum of attention. We have found that to be something that is a difference, and something that's been really helpful in centralizing conversation and engagement. And I guess the other thing is honestly the length of the meals. Again, times were different. A Shabbos meal when I was growing up, we didn't have kosher cookbooks galore with all sorts of, complicated dishes. My mother's an excellent cook, and she did like to vary things, but it was just a question of which type of roast chicken it was, which kugel it was, and which rice dish it was. And I don't really remember having more than 2, maybe 3 sides to the main course. And I don't think we were terribly unique about this. Rabbi Goldberg and I grew up in the same community. You can tell me if it was different for you, but we did have multiple appetizers. We had a fruit, we had fish, we had soup. Sometimes we had salad. The table was set like those, more intricate table settings. And then we had that main, which wasn't quite as elaborate as some of the mains that we have today. But the meal was much longer. And I think that something which has happened, whether consciously or subconsciously, because we've kind of understood the times, is to understand that people's attention spans are not quite what they used to be. And in our home, we have often, but not always, one appetizer followed by the main, and kind of helps keep that focus and engagement. So those are 2 things that come to my mind as differences.
And it's such a pleasure to reminisce. You happen to be the only panelist tonight whose Shabbos table I have had the privilege to eat at. And there's a charming story that I shared recently with you.
Now I'm nervous.
One time I came to your house for Shabbos as a 9th grader, I brought my own snacks. You tell me that is not a polite thing to do, to not have some sort of trust in the home that you're coming.
I probably told you that, yeah.
Roll-ups in my 9th grade backpack. Rabbi Mischel, Rav Judah, can you tell me a little bit about the Shabbos table you grew up with and how it's different than the Shabbos table you have today?
I for sure, but I'll also tell you that there's nothing wrong with bringing your own snacks places, just to make sure. It's not a trust issue. It's not a trust issue. It's part of our collective consciousness as Eastern European Jews, Dovid. It's okay. But I spent a long time working out of the fear that people would know that I bring snacks with me. There's nothing wrong with it. I grew up in a wonderful, lively, proud Jewish home. My parents did a great Shabbos. We always enjoyed Shabbos. In contradistinction to Rabbi Efrem Goldberg's Shabbos transition from being a longer meal to a shorter meal. I feel like the main difference in our experience, just on a geographic level, is I grew up in Muncie, and now I live in Eretz Yisrael. So now the whole calendar is based around Shabbos. Our kids don't really have much school on Friday. The older kids are off. No, people don't really work as much on Friday in Eretz Yisrael. So there's an Erev Shabbat, and the whole day then is different. Shabbos is different because Friday is different. Growing up, my dad would come home, 8 minutes into his 14 minutes, literally shave in the car on the way to shul. Throws keys, in the talis, whatever, in the coat room, and we get there, in time for Kabbalah Shabbos. So our Shabbos table really reflected just the intensity of the lack of transition from coming straight from work. That is a hardworking man, would make it back. He was Moser Nefesh. He sacrificed and made a tremendous Kiddush Hashem all of his years on Wall Street as really one of the first Shomer Shabbos Jews in his firm and his corporation, and we were raised with that. But there was no Erev Shabbos, so that the Friday night meal really reflected just that exhaustion from the week, and it was a short meal. It was a short meal. So I think for us now, I have the luxury and the blessing of turning Thursday night into Erev Shabbos, and then kind of like easing into the whole Friday experience, and the table is set and already Thursday night or Friday morning, and meaning the whole Shabbos then is different. So our table Friday night is really just a longer, more relaxed environment, except for, and here's the other main difference, cutting the kallah. I cut the kallah now. I never knew how much pressure there was. Everybody's sitting there waiting, looking at you like, what are you doing? And I'm sitting there like trembling. I want my hands to be wet on the kallah and to try to do it symmetrically and not inflict a wound. I never realized the pressure that the person cutting the kallah was under. So I feel like that's the second thing. So it's more relaxed and longer in some ways, but the the intensity and that pressure I feel in a much more visceral way.
I could not agree more. In the home I had growing up with my father, who also was really getting in at the buzzer there. That Friday night felt like the air in a balloon was slowly coming out of that high pressure. And I do a great imitation of my father's Erev Shabbos routine, and kind of like, it's like you got to give him a lot of space. I'm not going to do that right now, but I am going to turn it over to my dear friend Rabbi Goldberg. Rabbi Goldberg, what was the Shabbos table like growing up, and how is the current Shabbos table that you have now different?
Thank you so much. First of all, it's great to be with these fellow panelists. I'm learning so much just by listening, and it's really an honor to be together. And I identify, first of all, with what Rabbi Efrem Goldberg said in terms of the simplicity of our youth, the Shabbos meal presentations. I once got in so much trouble. I'd never anticipated this would be the most controversial thing I would write, but it was actually talking about, and I'm going to get myself back into trouble right now, but, talking about, I remember an appetizer was a slice of cantaloupe. Like, that was an appetizer. Today, what would be said about you? Your children would never find shidduchim and, a slice of cantaloupe as an appetizer. And again, my mother's an amazing cook, and we live near each other once again, and I love her cooking, and I cherish it. But there was a simplicity in the gashmias in our youth, which I think has gotten more complicated. And in some ways, it's more beautiful. The table's more regal. It's more royal, not only in the food and its sophistication, and the settings, and the china, and the crystal, and the silver, in the adornments, and how ornate everything is. And there's a beauty. That's Kavod Shabbos. It's honoring Shabbos in its sophistication, how advanced it is. It's also adding a lot of pressure and a lot of expense and a lot of sense of competitiveness. I guess one of the benefits of Corona, there isn't that competitiveness. So there was a simplicity on the physical sides of Shabbos, which has gotten much more complicated. And I'm not sure which is better. I think there's beauty to both. Another change, and this could be a Boca phenomenon here in Boca Raton, Shabbos meals are served with a buffet. The food of the main course, at least for sure, is put on a buffet. And that's not so much the topic, I'm sure, of why we're here tonight. I don't think it was a spiritual reason that emerged. It's much more a portion control, eating control, everyone having access to all the food control and not being right in front of you control. But it is a beautiful thing. But I'll say the most fundamental difference is the following. I have two very smart and very sophisticated parents, and our Shabbos table was a wrestling ring and wrestling match of intellectual debates from a young age, with respect, with derech eretz, with civility, with love, but with fire, with passion, and with a lot of commitment and devotion. I had friends who would come for Shabbos meals. They enjoyed being spectators to it, to watching my siblings, my parents, and I, later, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and getting into it. In fact, I have friends who, after I got married, when I was in YU, they would come home with me for Shabbos. They were not from out of town now, as if you're not from Boca, but they were from out of town, out of the New York area, and they would come for Shabbos with me. And when I got married, they continued to go to my parents for Shabbos without me, because they so enjoyed that conversation and how challenging it was, and how it made you be developed and articulate your thoughts and defend your positions. And that was very much the nature. I credit a lot of my thinking, my attitude, my approach, my siblings also in our development in honing those debate skills. So those meals were very long, and it was hashkafic topics and politics and whatever the issues of the day. Someone would bring it up. Someone else, either because they really believed it or just knew how to push the buttons of the other, would say a contrarian opinion, and a great debate would ensue. People would rotate out to take naps on the couch or make their way back. And it was, I learned a lot from it. We don't have that at our Shabbos table. It's not, when you get married, you blend Shabbos tables with the experience that happens in other homes. And in our table, we don't have that level of rigorous debate. We may speak about, I hope, sophisticated intellectual topics, but not from a position of true, really debate and going at one another. And there's no judgment on my youth or of today. I think they're different styles. I'm sure with the questions we'll get into more what we are doing today, but I'm a big believer, we're a big believer, my wife Yocheved and I, in creating rituals to the Shabbos table, that our children grow up and graduate and say, this is what happened, this is how it went. And there's certain rituals that are fun and fun-loving and that they identify with. And, there's an article, Rabbi Bashevkin, you and I both love, The Stories That Bind Us, the notion of the family narrative. And there, he talks about doing these quirky kind of practices, which children will always remember. It's part of that family narrative. So it's much lighter atmosphere. It's an atmosphere of fun, of conversation, of stories. It is provocative questions, thoughtful, challenging interactions, but not with the goal of honing debate skills as much as keeping everybody engaged.
So maybe we'll come more from that. I have a very close friend. I'll tell you who it is, Yoni Sonnenblick, who lives in Dallas, Texas. And we were talking recently. He was visiting his parents. I was at my parents in Long Island. And he said something to me that I've been thinking about since. He said, I have to confess, I think everybody our age, you're talking about our general age group, is somewhat insecure about what's going on at their Shabbos table. They have no idea. Is the way my Shabbos table looks, is the way that the kids are jumping off the walls, they're not at the table, they're going back and forth, whatever it is this the way it's supposed to go? And sometimes it's hard to remember what it was in fact like when we were that age. What is normal? So my question, and maybe you could continue because you were kind of moving into that, Rabbi Goldberg, about the rituals. Teenagers, children of different ages, are very often bored. They're not interested in sitting through a long Shabbos meal. How do you engage children, particularly teenagers, at your Shabbos table?
It's a really great question, and I have some strong and passionate feelings of this. So you'll stop me because I'm eager to hear and learn from our other panelists as well. I'll never forget an interaction I had with a couple who are Balei Tshuva, and they became religious through one of the outreach institutions in Yerushalayim where they met. They were set up, and they came to me and they said, it was rabbinic malpractice. They're on their way, and sadly, since then, have really lost a lot of their passion, their inspiration, and their Jewish life and living, because they said that when the individuals were makarev them, they saw that Shabbos table, and they heard about a description of what it could be like. It was almost utopian. It was like beautiful, and angels, singing, and everyone getting along, and harmony, and spiritual elevation, and a return to Sinai and Mishkan, and unbelievable. And they bought into that. They transformed their lives because of that, and they met one another, and they got married, and they dreamt, and their Shabbos table looked entirely not like that. It looked much more realistic, like many of ours, where especially today, where attention spans are less than they've ever been, and without the opportunity to use multimedia, it's harder to keep people without some device and to capture attention. And, we think we're going to come to the table and deliver a drasha, a chabura, a shir that we prepared, and everyone's going to be as excited about it as we are. And when we look at blank faces, or people talk, or they tune out or pass out or walk away, and there's fighting, and it looks nothing like what was described to us, then people will check out. So the first thing I think that's critically important is that we have realistic expectations, and that we paint realistic expectations for that next generation in Chassan and kallah classes and seniors in high school. And we talk about what's realistic, what's achievable, what are goals, how do we measure them, what's our plan, what's our resolution, and how do we get there, number one. Number two, in Zriya Ubinyan, Rav Wolbe has a very beautiful description, which I found so validating and in some ways empowering, where he talks about how prohibited it is to make children stay at a Shabbos table longer than they can. It's punitive. It's absolutely punitive. They're not designed. They're not made up. They're not programmed to do it. And because we're showing off for guests, or because we're meeting some dream or expectation, or because we're trying to repair something in our own childhood, not in my case, we're going to force children at the table longer than they belong there. We will damage and destroy those children. It's not natural for children. You have to know at what age, and you have to make the table a place that they will want to be rather than coerce or force. And when a Rav Wolbe writes that, it doesn't get more validating than that. Point number three. I once heard the speaker describe, and this is really, really also validating and very powerful. We come to the table and we have this image of the Dvar Torah. Everyone's going to be quiet. A hush is going to come over the table. Everyone will sit up in their chair, listen carefully. It will turn into this major discussion, a little beis medrash at our table. So, imagine you're a Rebbe, you're a teacher, a Mora in a classroom, and you walk in that classroom and you've got a kindergartner, a third grader, a sixth grader, a ninth grader, a 12th grader, someone in college. Now go talk about the Parsha. One would never believe anyone could be successful in that model in a classroom. Why do we assume we can be successful in that model around our table when we have children of different ages and we have adults from different backgrounds, and we think we're going to be able to create a classroom or a beis medrash that's going to engage them equally? It's foolish. It's a fool's errand. It's never going to happen, and one needs to be realistic about it. So what can we do? And I'll end with this. I think, like everything in life, ein kedusha bli hachana, which is not a real Maimar Chazal, but there is no holiness without preparation. And if we don't view our Shabbos table as the most important classroom with the most important curriculum that our children will encounter, then we've set ourselves up for failure. So you got to come to the table with that great story and with that provocative question. There's a wonderful series called What If, Art Scroll, and it's up to many, many volumes. It takes Rav Zilberstein's halachic and ethical and business and life dilemmas, and it organizes it based on the parsha. And we pass the book around, and my children take turns reading the question, and then we all debate what should the answer be, and then we go see the answer. And it's the most fun when you have Rav Schechter for Shabbos, and he gives his answer before you read Rav Zilberstein's answer, and that makes it even more fun. So the degree of preparation you come in, the ritual and the fun, the singing and the laughter and the levity is, I think, so realistic expectations, coming in prepared with a story, a question, a Dvar Torah, which is not going to engage everyone equally at different ages, but is going to have a life lesson or make people think or challenge them to be able to come out with their opinions, I think are some of the first steps to succeed.
Really, really appreciate it. I'm going to change my priority. I've been beginning my Shabbos meals by handing out Mar Makomo sheets, and given what you're saying, I'm going to put a stop to that right now. Rav Judah, can you tell us a little bit about how you would engage teenagers, children, at a Shabbos table, given what we're discussing tonight? You're on mute, Rav Judah. I'm so sorry.
No problem. It's all good. I would just, obviously everything Rabbi Goldberg said, I would aspire to and hope for. In terms of preparation, it doesn't have to start at the Shabbos table. Sometimes the more someone's vested, the more any of us have prepared for and are vested in the ritual or the experience, the more meaningful it is. I found that the more that we allow our kids, and not just allow them, but empower them and count on them, and give them responsibilities to help get ready for Shabbos, as opposed to presenting them with some prepackaged experience that we expect them to just show up for and enjoy. But the more they're involved in the preparation of Shabbos itself, Misha Tarach, the Erev Shabbos, Yochel B'Shabbos, the person who prepares on Erev Shabbat, they'll eat on Shabbos. It's not just a technical, we know that, there's no wisdom to that statement by the sages. What it means is that the more we invest ourselves, the more we put in, the more we'll be able to draw out. So we found that the more our kids are involved in that, the more meaningful the whole experience is. Another thought, another detail, is that we love talking about ourselves. I love talking about myself. I love hearing my own voice. I love hearing myself talk. And so do teenagers. Teenagers like they really love hearing their own voice. Instead of divrei Torah, formal ideas, we don't. It's not. I don't know. You and your friends are talking. We could all talk together. We ask our kids to share about themselves, whether it's highlights of the week or when we bring out the soup. The highlight of everyone's week is a milah tova, and everyone shares a little bit about what they're going through and something they feel proud of, something they feel good of, something they feel good about. It's cultivated a real environment of sharing, of positivity, of confidence, of being able to share in a safe way, in a healthy way, in a good way, something that they're working on, an accomplishment, something that they feel good about, whether it's interpersonally, something in the house with their siblings or with their friends or at school, and it's an opportunity for them to shine. And that's something which cuts across all ages and backgrounds. People love to feel good, and people want to feel good, and want to feel good about themselves. And creating an environment where people are able to be themselves and share that is very powerful. All of this, I would just say, is on a background of an important message from Chazal, that Shabbos, more than an opportunity to transmit values, or more than an opportunity to engage with family or to give over the parsha, Chazal describe it as Beis HaMelech. When we spend time on Shabbos, we're in the palace of the king. We're in the intimate company of Hashem. And klum chaser b'Beis HaMelech. There's nothing lacking in the presence of the king. We have everything we need, which is where the whole idea of malachas of Shabbos, of work on Shabbos, or doing on Shabbos, or the lack of doing on Shabbos. Kol malachtecha asuya. As soon as Shabbos begins, all activity, all work, all fixing is done. There's nothing more to do. There's nothing more to fix. Exactly the way it is at the beginning of Shabbos is the way it's going to remain. It's the only time in our lives during the week where we're not trying to improve and change and tinker with and l'shaper and make things better. Throughout the week, it's the world of working and the world of improving. Shabbos is the time of just being, of just letting things be, including people. And if we're going to leave the crock pot that's unplugged all of Shabbos because no, this is the way it's supposed to be. Even if we think we'd have more Oneg Shabbos by plugging in that hot plate or by plugging in the hot water urn, we don't, because we understand that the Malachot of Shabbos are predicated on the belief that the way it is the way it's supposed to be. And it can't get any better than this. So the Shem Shmuel says that applies to people also. So teens are constant targets of criticism and comments and nudging and hocking by teachers, by parents, by all of us. It's just the nature of the relationship. It's just that time. Kids in general, if we leave them alone on Shabbos, just let them be, let them enjoy. Shem Shmuel suggests that Shabbos is not a time for criticism or chinuch. It's not a time to be mechanech by pointing things out. It's just a time to enjoy together, to recognize that we're in the presence of the King. And if everybody's vested in preparing and doing that together, then and feeling good about themselves, then certainly the Shabbos environment will be very sweet.
Absolutely beautiful. Mrs. Kaminetsky, what practices have you done at your Shabbos table to ensure that all of the teens, children, students around your Shabbos table are engaged? And just remember to go off mute.
Yeah, okay. So it's interesting. The question is actually, there's certain practices and rituals, as Rabbi Goldberg mentioned in his home, that we over the years have instituted and changed as our children grew and we went through different stages of as our children were growing up at our table that we had as well. But I'm actually thinking, Dovid, as you asked that question, even just perhaps the things that we've instituted in a subconscious way, that aren't necessarily the highlight of the week or the, triggering question or article or trivia card or whatever it might be. I think the two things that are coming to my mind as I'm listening to both Rabbi Mischel and Rabbi Goldberg is how the themes of teaching and effective teaching are that we know are true in schools and classrooms, whether it's the concept of acknowledging diverse learners at your table, or as Rabbi Mischel said, hachana. A teacher is going to be as good as the preparation that they put into their teaching, are all tools that we find, and it shouldn't really surprise us because parents are our children's primary teachers. We discharge that obligation to people during the school day and during the school year. But without a question, certainly it's the Torah's perspective, and certainly psychologists and sociologists will tell you that the people who have the greatest effect on us as people are our parents. We are the teachers of our children. And yeah, to some extent, the Shabbos table is a forum that is very similar to a classroom. So when I think about effective teaching, and again, these are some of the untangibles, I think the first thing that I think about is that effective teachers are passionate people. You can have a person with a lot of methodology and a lot of learned tools, but if they're not passionate about the subject that they're teaching, then the transmission of that information is going to be very superficial. Most of us, when we look back on the people that really inspired us and the places that we were really inspired, it's because we felt that passion. So I think that as I'm thinking about it, I think that one of the things that happens in our home is that when we do bring an article to the Shabbos table to read and discuss, or we do raise a question, or even when we look through a book, like a what if book, which is an excellent suggestion that Rabbi Goldberg, made. It's things that actually strike our fancy. This is something that I was reading and it was curious about. And I'll be honest, at our table, that doesn't happen every week. It happens often, but it happens when something is really interesting or curious to us. It's not just the fill-in, I need to find something, let me, a minute before Shabbos, press print on something that ended up in my inbox. It's something that resonates with us and that we can share in a passionate way. When I say us, when my children were younger, it was primarily my husband and I, but that has actually become an accepted norm in our home. Bring something to the Shabbos table. It's not an expected norm, but an accepted norm. Bring something to the Shabbos table that you saw or that you were curious about and you wanted to share your passion. And I guess the other thing that I would mention is that an effective classroom is when the students' questions drive the learning, when the students' passions and interests drive the learning. So to take those cues from your teenagers in particular, frankly, I don't think it's so different than any conversation with teenagers at any point in the week. Shabbos table maybe is a little bit more of a hyper focus on communication and more of an opportunity for us all to kind of be caught in the same place without the distractions of devices and needing to go places and being pulled in other directions. But frankly, it's often hard to engage teenagers in conversation. And the biggest trick is to always just listen carefully for what they're interested in and what their passions are. Our home definitely is a home where the Shabbos table is full of Zmiros. Particularly my husband and his family are very musical, and singing and song has been a tremendous, tremendous part of our Shabbos tables. And it's also a place of Divrei Torah. But I will say that many a late Friday night, the meal has gone on and on with one of my sons regaling us with a comedy routine from one of his favorite comedians, or going through a song.
I didn't interrupt anybody else, but I'm going to have to ask.
Ryan Regan is very popular in the Kaminetsky home. Yeah. But you didn't ask which son either, Dovid, but yeah, we'll leave that off here now. But, or just even going through a music album, that isn't related to Shabbos necessarily, but is some of the family's top hits and favorites. The type of music that before everybody had their own headphones in the car, we used to listen to in the car, going back to those old songs of, the long road trips or whatever it might be. There are, and interestingly, Rabbi Goldberg, to us, that has actually become a little ritualistic. Some of my in-law children know that, oh gosh, once they start with that, then they're going to go to that, then they're going to move on to that. But those are the things that are my children's passions. Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily, what's moving me at the moment, but going with their passions, I think is often the key to engaging teenagers.
Very, very moving. And I'm going to already start texting some of your children to figure that out. I'll have an answer by the end of the panel session, which child it was. We are already getting close to time, and I want to make sure we get through some of my rapid fire questions. We're not going to do. So I'm going to be I've been a little lax with the timing. I'm going to be a little tougher now. I want 60 seconds, and I'm going to actually time from each on a Shabbos table practice, either at your own Shabbos table or that you've seen at others, that you wish you can stop and change. Maybe it makes you cringe. Maybe you see it's a common misunderstanding, but the feeling is don't do that. There's no reason for it. It's not necessary. I just like to go one by one, and we'll continue with Mrs. Kaminetsky.
Okay. I, in general, am not a fan of the children's table. The adults, the 3 or 4 couples or family members gathering together around the dining room table, and a separate table, maybe on the other side of the room or in the kitchen. Definitely, I believe in giving children food that they like. But the notion of this is an adult meal. No, it's family time. And if families want to come together, there's a beauty in that. But the children should be front and center and part of the meal, not relegated to a children's table.
I love that answer, and I wish they served those delicious dinosaur chicken nuggets.
Right. Everybody wants the chicken nuggets. Yeah.
So tasty. Rev Judah, what is a practice that you wish we could discontinue, either at your own or someone else's Shabbos table?
Okay. When everybody's sitting at the table and finish the kallah, and the balabasta, the hostess, gets up and goes to the kitchen and serves the soup plate by plate from the kitchen. And everybody sits in the dining room comfortably, and the conversation goes on without her, and she sits there back and forth. We were once somewhere where that was going on, and I got up to go help, and it created a whole to-do. It goes against the egalitarian upbringing that I had in our home, and it was not nice. Bring the pot to the table. Just serve the soup from the table.
I love it. Rabbi Goldberg.
First of all, I'm following debate rules, so I want to just answer your last question for one more second more before moving to this, because I was stimulated by the other answers that were offered very, very quickly. Because I was talking to someone last night, someone I respect greatly, is a major community leader, not in our community, who told me that he posed the following question at his Shabbos table, and the conversation went on for hours. And I want to just deposit it here as an example of what we're talking about in terms of engaging teenagers. He turned to his children and he said, if you could go back in time not long ago, and you could press the button that would introduce the world to the internet and technology, knowing now the positives and the negatives, knowing now the impact in the good way and the challenges it's brought, if you had the ability to push the button, would you? Would you change the world to introduce it, or would you not push the button and deny it to the world? It's a great example of a question that if you think it in advance, people are going to have strong opinion. Teenagers are going to have incredibly strong opinions, and you're going to find yourself not even realizing how much time has passed since then. The other thing, very quickly, we have benchers.
Is this going in your 1 minute, Mark, or this is additional?
No, my 1 minute hasn't started yet. Debate rules. You're going to have to mute my microphone.
You're treating me like the Chris Wallace of Shabbos table debate.
Correct. First debate rules. First debate rules. So the other thing quickly is we have a bencher that has 432 songs in the back, organized by Yomim Tovim, Shabbos, famous English songs, Sephardi, Israeli songs. And also when Mr. Kaminetsky was talking about staying up late at night singing, we have a ritual. You just call out a number and then we sing that song. And again, you can get lost in it, and singing is very powerful. Very quickly, I can't stand when you come in from shul and it takes a long time to start the meal. It happens to be not halachically ideal at all. Kiddush should be said as soon as possible. The only thing worse than not starting the meal is making Kiddush, and then a lifetime passes before you actually wash, and you're sitting there waiting. We could have all this conversation over the meal. There's nothing stopping us.
We have to recheck our yichus. I don't think we're related anymore. 3 hours before Bashevkin starts a meal. But I absolutely love that. I want to go through some actual rapid fire. I'm going to go fairly quick. I'm going to go, I'll call on each individual. Your favorite dip of Judah, Shabbos dip.
Muted.
You're on mute.
I believe in dips, Dovid. I believe in all dips. Tchina.
Rabbi Goldberg.
Falafel dip. A newer dip. Falafel dip.
Mrs. Kaminetsky.
Olive.
Olive dip. Okay, I'm a matbucha man myself. My son's favorite song right now, right after Shabbos is coming, is now Kichu Imachem Devarim from Regesh from Shmuel, Brazil. Mrs. Kaminetsky, what's your favorite Shabbos song?
My favorite Shabbos song? Curry Bone.
Rabbi Goldberg.
Ko'echsof.
Rabbi Judah.
Punchinello, funny fellow. No, we do a dance routine. That's when people get involved.
What is your least favorite Shabbos food, Rabbi Goldberg?
Tongue.
Mrs. Kaminetsky.
Chicken on the bone.
Amen. Amen. Rabbi Judah.
Any involvement or incorporation of fruit, it's not the time. It's not the time.
It's not the time. What's your most memorable Shabbos meal, Rabbi Goldberg?
There have been many. As a rabbi, they get interrupted often, but I'd say most memorable was when two young girls came into the home, knocked on the door, and were bawling. Their mother had passed away that night. She had been terminally ill, but the whole family got involved in reacting to that and responding to that, and I think it was very memorable for them all.
Mrs. Kaminetsky.
It was actually a Shabbos that we spent in San Diego at the home of Rabbi and Mrs. Bogopolsky, old friends of ours, and they had a Holocaust survivor there. I'm sorry that I'm forgetting his name. I hope somebody who's listening might be able to remind me, because it was so powerful. And I didn't realize that he was a Holocaust survivor, honestly. And at some point, something triggered that. And in front of my children, he unbuttoned his shirt and showed us that his number, he was one of a few number of people, I don't even remember the circumstances, had been actually imprinted on his chest, not on his arm. And you would think that that's a horrifying thing to happen in the middle of a Shabbos meal. But this man was such a Baal Emunah and exuded such beauty and chen that it made an incredible impression on my children and on my husband and I till this day.
Rev Judah, most memorable Shabbos meal.
I love Shabbos with our family. I love Shabbos every week with our family. But on our 20th anniversary, we went away for Shabbos together for the first time, just alone, Or and I, my wife and I, to Yerushalayim. We spent Shabbos in the old city. It was really, it was unbelievable.
We're basically finished. I really want to ask this final question. It is a quick question, but I'm always curious about it. Rabbi Goldberg, when do you usually start and end your Shabbos day meal?
Pre-corona or during corona?
Pre, the good old days.
Pre-corona, the meal price, it starts by 12. If it hasn't started by 12, I'm an unhappy person. And, can go till 3, 4.
Kanai Nahara. Mrs. Kaminetsky.
Pre-corona, our meals would start at 11:45, and they were done by 2 o'clock mincha.
I love it. And Rav Judah.
Rolling admissions, Dovid. There's never been any consistency with when we start and stop anything, especially Shabbos meals.
Rolling admissions. I absolutely love it. I thank you so much to all of our panelists, Mrs. Kaminetsky, Rabbi Goldberg, Rav Judah. It is such a privilege and pleasure to be speaking with you tonight about that unifying purpose and goal of so much of what NCSY, so many families across the world do, making Shabbos come alive. Thank you all so much, and stay tuned for a special advisor session with Rabbi Moshe Benovitz. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody. A good Erev Shabbos.
Thank you, everyone. Good Shabbos.